Right, so over to Michael. I've put this this fabulous picture that we found.
Yeah, I think I'm just offering a couple of tools here. I think one of you said you'd come for some tools. I think this is a good tool. So you might already be familiar with it. I'm sure the concept you're familiar with, but it's something that we projected once in a meeting, and I think it really helped, particularly where people were a bit sceptical about why we were taking some positive action, really. And I think people can't always understand the difference between equity and treating people the same. So as you probably know, on the left-hand side, we're treating everyone the same because they've all got the same size box. But actually, that means that one of those individuals can't actually see over the barrier. So in the middle picture, what you're doing is you're giving that person, because they need two crates, and now they can actually see over the barrier. So I'd seen that before, and then actually, I don't know if this popped up on anybody else's Twitter feed, but it popped up on my Twitter feed this last week. Actually, now a third picture, which is really obvious when you look at it, is actually why have you got that barrier there in the first place? And so I suppose if we're relating to the conversation we've just had, I think the recruitment one works really well, doesn't it? So Lisa talked about what you do for people who have a disability, for example, in guaranteeing them an interview, and that's certainly not treating them the same. It's giving them that second box. Or as Shamim talked about, ways to get more applicants from certain groups, so they've got a better chance of being in the interview. But actually, that right-hand third picture saying, actually, perhaps we could sweep some of that away. So I don't know if the return to work scheme you talked about as an example of that, but certainly, we've ended up appointing somebody with a disability, and actually, I think it's partly because we just completely changed the process. We had a much bigger pool. So instead of giving them a sort of buy into a very small interview day, actually what we did was we had an earlier stage. So actually we met more people informally, and they got to know us and we got to know them, and then we only took a smaller group forward to interview. So we sort of changed the process instead of just giving people an advantage within that process. So I think that's perhaps a useful tool for you to explain this to other people. I'm not sure you understand that. And then the other tool we wanted to share was around decision making. I'm not sure. Do we need to see the video, Lisa? Should we just look at the slides?
Yeah, let's just look at the slides.
Yeah. There's something called Sociocracy, and there'll be a whole course just explaining it to you. And I don't want to pretend that we've sort of gone for this completely as a whole organisation. We've got some sort of champions of it, but there's certainly two sort of key things that I think we've taken from it in terms of making our decision making inclusive. And one of them, represented by this picture, is something called rounds. So I don't know, maybe in your meetings whether some people do all the talking. It's certainly a danger, and so one way to deal with that is actually, it feels really artificial and sort of clunky at first, but is actually to go round the room, and actually is what we've ended up doing anyway on Zoom, isn't it? One way to manage Zoom is literally just to walk around the windows. So everybody has a turn. So you make sure you hear from everybody, because there are people, and they're often, some of the quietest people are sometimes the best at pulling things together or summarising what other people have said, or they're very reflective. So they might not necessarily want to go first, and it might put them on the spot, but actually it means that certainly by the end of the meeting, everybody sort of had a turn. So that's definitely something that has become completely ingrained. So all our Zoom meetings have got an element of that. And there's another element of it in the decision making, which sort of links with the rounds, So as you're making a decision, you go round the circle, and people need to say either I like it, in other words, I'm completely comfortable, this is how I wanted to do it all along, or actually they say they've got no objection, which is really important. So it might not be their preferred option, but actually they can live with it. And I think it's really important, if we're looking to make inclusive decisions that everybody's buying into, that you recognise some people are going to accept it, or that wasn't their preferred one, or actually no, they might object to it. So this model is giving people like a veto, really. So they could say, I don't consent to this, and that would mean you've got to go round again, and you've got to change the proposal so eventually it gets round the circle. Again, I think we tried that in the leadership team, and it was quite hard to do in a formal way. I suppose on areas where it's perhaps easier to get consent, obviously it's going to be easy to make this work. But I think it's still, even in the meetings where we don't formally do it, I think for me it has shifted my thinking in terms of it's not yes or no. There is certainly that middle ground, and sort of no objection is really positive. And when we do want to get to there, because on the whole we don't really want to be making decisions that some people have got a real problem with, because actually if we're not including people, or we're railroading people, actually in my experience as a leader, then that comes back to bite you later on, doesn't it? If they haven't bought into it, it's really important that people buy into things. So there's just a sort of couple of tools. I saw some chats coming. Did Lisa say she liked it? No.
Yeah,
Lisa likes it.
Jenny said that she started to ask for good news instead of how are you, because that often brings out the miserable stuff. So I was saying I like it. I think we should just ask for good news.
Good. A good point about the time. Yeah, this is not. It's an investment, I suppose, because probably in the end it will save you. It certainly saves you the time of sort of people unpicking decisions, for example, and having to deal with fallout, or making a poor decision. So there's a couple of tools for us. So that was one of the other sort of points from Deloitte at the beginning. So I think we dealt with them all now. So treating people fairly, people feeling they belonged, and decision making. The other things we wanted to cover in the last half hour were a little bit around change, and then just reintroducing some of the material from Deloitte around traits. So change is one of the things that I teach in leadership and management, and sort of there are loads of models, not many of them specifically around inclusion, and Lisa showed me this one, which I like because it is focused on inclusive change, and I think it's helpful if we, for example, start in the bottom right where it says reinforcement mechanisms. So that's about having the structures in place, and I like the fact that it's calling it reinforcement, because I think on their own, as we know, they don't change very much, really. I think they are there to support a change in attitude. I mean, they're important, but they're not sufficient, I don't think. I think moving on round, if we go left to the skills, I think sessions like this and what you're going to share with other people in the organisations from this session are really important. Training's really important. Above that, we talked about modelling. So that's actually seeing it in practice, isn't it? And so rather than skills just being taught, they're sort of caught, is the phrase, isn't it? You actually see that happening in action. And then on the top right, I think for me that's arguably the most important sort of quadrant, and we did a bit on culture in the first webinar. And I think sort of telling the story of your organisation is very compelling, and it's sort of something that is done over a period of time. And we've done that a little bit as we've told you a bit about Furcroft. I mean, I've been there a long time, so I can sort of show people the difference that it's made. You know, when we had, basically there were 4 of us and we made all the decisions, and everybody liked us making all the decisions because they didn't have to get involved. But actually the number of sort of U-turns we had to do was just ridiculous. So it made the organisation really inconsistent. And as soon as I say something like that, there's quite a sort of picture that probably conjures up for you, and as people join the organisation. I mean, it's really interesting to have when new people join. It's really interesting to hear how people describe the college, and then this new person obviously is comparing it to where they've been, and that's so instructive. I mean, we've got somebody who's just joined us from another college, and yeah, everything she's saying is sort of reinforcing and in a really positive way how inclusive we are in comparison. And I think that sort of narrative is really important in making change happen. And I think this does take a bit of time, doesn't it? Particularly if we're genuinely asking people to change their attitudes. I don't think it's possible to admit to that, because I think it's quite costly actually changing the way that you think and behave. And I think actually you might be looking for that to happen over a period of time. So on the next slide, I'm going to ask you to get involved in this one. Is one of the Deloitte traits is about courage, and I think it is quite courageous what you're sort of taking on as becoming inclusive leaders, because we are challenging the status quo, and in the end, I mean, I hope we're challenging society as well, that we'd have an influence outside our organisation. And one of the models that I do like from the leadership and management change module that I teach is called force field analysis. So I don't know if any of you have come across this picture before, but I think it's very realistic. So what you've got there in the middle is a line, and on the line you've got the change you want to make. So for us on this webinar, it's about making our organisations more inclusive. And the key thing about this model is that the line isn't moving, and that could be the reality in some organisations, that actually they're not becoming more inclusive, actually, despite our best efforts. So I think if that's the case, then this is a useful model. It's by somebody called Kurt Lewin, and he says the reason that it's not changing is because, you see, there are 2 arrows, and if I've drawn them correctly, they're sort of the same size. So we've got all the things that are in favour of this change to become more inclusive, that they're driving it. But actually, underneath, you've got an equal and opposite force, which are the resistors. So all the reasons your organisation isn't becoming more inclusive. So let's have a go at just populating this. So we've already talked to this a little bit in terms of, we use different language, didn't we? We talked about barriers, we talked about business cases. So hopefully you got some ideas already. So if you go up to, so we haven't done it in this workshop before, I don't know if you've done it in other webinars. So at the top of your screen, if you go to view options and click on that, and then you'll see something that says annotate. And then one of the options in annotate is to text. So just type in just one idea at a time. And when you come off it, you should be able to move it. I don't think you press enter, I think you just move it. So if you can move it above or below the line. So if it's something that, oh yeah, we'll come back to you, Shami. If you are thinking it's a driver, so these are things that are in favour, are going to help you make this change to become more inclusive, put it above the line. If it's a resistor, and it's one of the reasons that this is being blocked, if you like, then put your text below the line. And anyone who's having trouble annotating, including Shamim on her mobile, Shamim, if you put it in the chat, and just be, yeah, oh, there you are, Lisa's ahead of me. If you put it in the chat, and we'll move it there for you. So have a go at that. Aha, yeah.
Yeah, the recent press around Black Lives Matter has definitely made this, it's brought it to the forefront of people's minds again, hasn't it? Oh, good. So somebody's already inclusive. Who put we're already inclusive? Oh, lovely, Jenny. Where do you work?
Oh, well, I'm not thinking about my workplace. I'm thinking about the board I sit on, which is all white men who are over 50, mostly 70, except me.
Right.
White woman. So, yeah, I've been talking about our diversity. We've been talking about it for a long time, and we just struggle to recruit board members. And I raised it recently because of the Black Lives Matter issues, and I got some just resistance. You know, it wasn't. They thought that we were doing enough. We're not.
Yeah, it's. I'm on a governing body as well, a board, and yeah, they're blind to it. They don't see it as a problem.
No. And I felt a bit. I struggled a bit because I was just like, well, I'm a white privileged woman. I'm not going to be the best person to be pushing this forward, but I'm the only voice at the moment that is raising it. So I'll be an ally and try and do my best.
Well, that's it. I've taken the approach as I just keep raising it, and you know, I get the raised eyes, you know, the eye rolls. But I think, you know, it's incremental and things don't happen all at once. But I think if you just keep on, you know, talking about it, I think the conversation's the important bit, isn't it? Keep having that conversation. I'm typing in from the chat at the same time. Oh, there we go. I can copy and paste from the chat. That makes it easy.
Oh, that's good.
It's new technology.
So it's interesting that the resistors we've got, so I can see 3, is that right? Yeah, they're all to do with a certain sort of complacency, aren't they? Okay.
Yeah, so there's a lot of talking in the resistors about people just not realising that they've just not seen it as a problem.
So, carry on pasting, but I think one of the most useful things about this model is, again, it sort of makes sense if you think about it. How are we going to get this line to move down the page? And obviously there's 2 ways. So we can increase the drivers, and maybe that's what's happening. So this, you know, is definitely, yeah, Lisa and I first talked to the Combined Authority about running these a year ago, and actually the time we've come to run these webinars, you know, they've become way more topical because of Black Lives Matters. So that's definitely going to be helping any conversation at the moment, isn't it? But what Lewin says is, yeah, you do want to increase the drivers, but what can happen is you then get a sort of reaction to that. And if you think about people's reaction to to Black Lives Matters. In some cases, it's obviously been a sort of equal and opposite and really unhelpful reaction. So he also talks about reducing the resistors, which is the other way. If you want to get this line to move down the page, if that resistors arrow was smaller, then it would move. And he says in some ways that's the best place to start. So maybe we could just quickly do that. So initially the points we had there were about complacency and avoiding the problem. So how would you reduce those resistors? Any ideas? How would you stop that complacency? Training, sharing. I think sharing lived experience is a really powerful one, isn't it? I mean, all of these have some challenges. I think that's very exposing for the people who, you know, if they continually have to share their story, and why should they in one effect? But actually, that's right, because what it does is lived experience stops this being an issue and an ism and about us and them, because actually it's about people who we can see are real people, and maybe we even knew them. Educate definitely is one of them. I think for me the thing that's inescapable are the outcomes that Lisa put. So wherever this is happening, wherever it is going wrong, at Furcroft, like anywhere else, there is a gender pay gap, and so we need to measure it. And at some point, this is going wrong. So we're not saying it's you or it's there, but at some point, unless we're going to say something that is unthinkable, such as, for example, Black people have a criminal tendency, so that is completely unacceptable. So therefore, how is it that more Black men end up in prison? So somewhere along the line, and we're not saying, it's you, it's not saying it's probably is the police, but at some point along the line, or at several points along the line, from education, school to prison, there are several things going wrong, because you can't argue with the outcomes. So I think education is a really important one. So as I was talking, I was looking at so in terms of reducing the resistors, recruitment, not getting applicants due to increasing stigma and taboos. So probably very easy to say removing stigma and taboos. That's quite a challenge, isn't it? Yeah, and biases, we're back to bias. Yeah. So I need to move the way I've done my screen, I can't see the bottom right corner, and I can't move my, there we go. Not perspective taking. Oh, data was there. There we are. Data was hidden in the corner, and role modeling. Great. So some really good ideas there.
Yeah.
Fantastic. They're still coming. Okay. So I think you can probably save this chat, and we'll save this chat, because there are some great ideas there. We shared the Furcroft ones, and you've given us lots of other ones. So over to Lisa.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'd just mirror everything that everybody's saying there. So I think education, I think really bringing those outcomes. And I think, at the end of the day, whatever group you're on, you're going to have some kind of client. So if you're in governance, that might be your school. If you're in an organisation, that might be your client or your students, and always trying to mirror those and putting those at the heart of anything, is always going to bring this, I think, to the forefront. So for me as a governor, I always start talking about the children, and it's about being inclusive for our children and reflecting what our student body look like. So just moving on, we've got last 15 minutes. So I just wanted to talk about a concept of being inclusive isn't about an individual conforming. So I often see this, I think, with women in leadership, and this is where it kind of rings true for me, is that sometimes, I worked in an FE college, and male leaders in an FE college are of a type. They're very strong, dominant, command and control leaders. And any female that makes it into those leadership ranks is kind of twice as dominant and twice as strong, and conforms to that male leadership stereotype. Now, inclusion for me isn't about conforming, it's about really valuing what differences people are bringing. So it can't just be about bringing in diverse people and then them conforming to what the rest of the people in the organisation think like, or look like, or sound like. Again, this is taken from that CIPD research report, which I thought was really good. And it's just, inclusion doesn't mean fitting in, it means feeling valued for uniqueness. So it's back to that Deloitte slide about feeling valued for being unique. So truly inclusive organisations are where different identities are valued, and it's about the ability to be authentic. So it's people feeling like they can be themselves. I do a lot of with kind of neurodiverse, looking at people that are neurodiverse. So that might be they've got autism or ADHD or dyslexia, so they think differently. And I think you've really got to be able to allow people to be authentic in themselves and bring their whole selves, and be valued for that. Without the need to conform to group norms. So another point that I wanted to touch on there, you might have seen this slide if you came to our first workshop. I shared this slide at the first workshop. So diverse teams have better outcomes. So actually the world that we live in, we need diverse teams. This unstable world of coronavirus and climate crisis and Black Lives Matter and all of these other things that are going on and going to keep, making this world a very unstable place. We need diverse teams to make really good decisions and have better outcomes. Diverse teams have higher levels of innovation and creativity, lower levels of absence in ER cases, and less mental health issues. So with diverse teams, if you get somebody that's from an underrepresented group or thinks differently and they conform, you lose the effect of having a diverse team. Really, you've got to be inclusive and value difference in thinking to be able to get the most from that diverse team, that diversity of thinking. So I don't know if anybody's ever seen Lencioni before. Hands up if you've seen this before. Lencioni, five dysfunctions of a team. Well, if you haven't, it's a little book. I read it in one evening, which is always a good book in my standard. And it's this model of what makes really good teams, really effective teams, particularly management and leadership teams. And in blue here, this triangle is the basis of his model, really. And what he says is to have a really cohesive, a really good team, you've got to have a certain level of conflict. And this was the point that I just wanted to come on to. So if you get a lot of diverse people together and a lot of people who think differently and who have different opinions, you will then get conflict. But actually, we shouldn't be looking for no conflict, because that's not what makes a really effective team. You actually really need conflict. You need healthy challenge. So Lencioni's model, it starts off that you've got to trust each other. So that's one area of kind of, you do team building and you build this vulnerability-based trust within your team or within your organisation. And what that enables you to do is have conflict, but have healthy challenge, because people trust that that's for the right reasons. So if you're all on the same page and you're all striving for the same outcomes, which is the best outcome for your team, then it's okay to challenge. And it's okay to have some conflict in that team, because you all trust that it's coming from the best place. Once you've got that healthy challenge, you get commitments, you get buy-in, you get accountability, and then that helps you achieve your results. So that's basically the Lencioni model. But what I'm doing really is flipping that in terms of higher diversity is going to bring conflict. But you do want some conflict, because that's what's going to make a high performing and a really good diverse team that's going to give you better decisions. With conflict, I suppose the last point I'd just make is, with conflict, you will get healthy conflict and healthy challenge, but there is also the risk that you'll get other types of conflict. And if you put a lot of diverse people together, you will no doubt have unhealthy conflict that you have to manage. but as long as your policies and your procedures are there, and as long as you've done your training, which we covered on some of the last slides, you know, actually you've got all the tools there to be able to deal with that conflict effectively. Okay. Back over to Michael.
So we just want to finish off really with 5 minutes just thinking about commitment and where you go and where we go from here. I've talked at a couple of points about this model, which is actually from Deloitte, and they didn't do it off the top of their heads. They talked to tens of thousands of leaders and staff members to see what were the traits, the sort of characteristics of inclusive leaders. And they came up with all these C's, so it's slightly forced. So cognizance is actually about being conscious of your bias. Several of these we've talked about in this or in the previous workshop. So we talked about being culturally intelligent. Somebody right at the beginning talked about collaboration. I think curiosity is important, continuing to learn. I had a slide earlier about having some courage, because this is quite a brave thing to tackle the status quo. And the final one then, the bottom left-hand corner, was around commitment. I think Lisa will skip the stamping. Should we jump to the last slide?
Yeah, okay. So, so West Midland Combined Authority, I mentioned earlier on in the session that they did this inclusive leadership report, which specifically has a lot of statistics about the Midlands. It's well worth having a look at. One of the things that came from that report and from them launching it was actually on their website. There's a pledge. So you can go onto their website and you can pledge yourself and commit to being an inclusive leader. So this is taken from that page, and I can share the link. I'll send you an email afterwards that's got an evaluation survey on as well, and I'll share the link for that pledge if you want to go on. But we thought that it would be quite nice, just to finish off the session today, if you just put in the chat maybe how you might commit something from this workshop. So whether it's one of the West Midland Combined Authority pledges there, around, you know, mentoring colleagues or creating the right culture, or whether there's something else that you just want to commit to yourself, just as a bit of a nice finisher to the 90 minutes that we spent looking at this today. So if you wanted to just put those in the chat. It's been a really nice group today, by the way. It's really, really, really nice that it's so intimate and we've all been able to kind of hear from everybody in the group. And I love the concept of integrated pluralists, Nazia. Oh, that's a lovely one. So you're gonna champion inclusive thinking. Yeah, that's a good one. And Jenny, for the board that you sit on, you're going to challenge your colleagues and organisation where more needs to be done to realise inclusion. Good. And Pearl, mentoring younger people. That's such an important point. And Michael, you're going to compare the gender gap at the college with the gap at the school where you're a governor. That will be interesting. I'd be interested to know how that goes. So Shameen, one of the things you will do with staff is ask them about their goals and ambitions. So when opportunities arise, I can ensure they're upskilled. And we need to do more for upper leaders by voicing staff needs better. Yeah, thank you. That's really good. For your workplace, I will support colleagues to be open about their identity and mental health. Jenny, lovely. I will do B and D. Oh, Mulia, what's B and D?
Oh, well, somebody's ticked the box, which is very clever.
Oh, yes.
In the second and fourth box.
Okay, and create the right culture for flexible working to thrive. Again, that's really important. Like I said, for me personally, that's one of the things that's, you know, allowed me to move up in my career.
Malia and I work together, and I think we've had quite a few kind of challenges that you've talked about. So I'm looking forward to talking to her afterwards.
Brilliant.
Brilliant. Well, it's interesting you put the same thing.
Yeah. Well, if you wanted to come back to us for any advice or anything, or take anything further, feel free to do that. I think we'll leave it there for today. So thank you all. You've been a really lovely group today. It's been really nice to hear from you all and hear about the different challenges you're facing. And I do hope that you've got something from the session. Like I said, I'll send an email round. I'll send the recording of the session today and an evaluation form and a link to that pledge as well. And then if there's anything else, just get in touch with us. And good luck to everybody with your journey on inclusive leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you. Really helpful.
Thanks, Shameen. Thanks for your input. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording there.